Good evening. It was not the intro that I planned to play, but okay. This was the old one, and that's okay. So, welcome to the Senior Synth stream. Today we are going to talk about MIDI 2.0, version 2.0, and we have this guy, Andrew Mee, and we have Dan Phillips, and we have Scott MacLean.
Hey everyone.
Andrew, you are working on MIDI 2.0, or you are one of the leading, shall I say, scientists behind it?
I wouldn't class myself as a scientist. Yeah, so my main occupation is working within MIDI 2, within a whole group of people. There's a whole range of people working on it. But my role within, mainly work within MIDI Association. My main role is, these days, the technical board chair. So the technical standards board chair. Which, the main role of that is we get all of the different specifications that are made by all the different working groups, which takes some time, as people will be aware of. And then we make sure that it's going to do the right thing, and then we send it off for the rest of the members to have a look at and go through a process to try and get it out the door so that then everybody can use those specifications.
Yeah, I just fell off. I was trying to write something in the chat, and then I did something completely different. So, but welcome, Andrew, and Dan. We know you already from Cork, behind the wave state and the multi-poly.
Multi-poly, yeah. Mod wave and ARP 2600 plugin for KC5 and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you've been doing some MIDI 2.02 on those instruments.
My group has. I have to say that I haven't been very involved, but yes.
Okay. So you know nothing about it. Great.
Pretty much nothing. Yeah.
Okay, and we have Scott MacLean. You have just landed, or what?
I did. I decided it was a nice day outside, and I called up my daughter, who has never been in my airplane before, and I'm like, it's a nice day. Do you want to go up for a flight? She's like, okay. So we went up, and she flew for most of the time. She was good at it, and she's like, this wasn't scary. This was fun. So, yeah, I just literally walked in the door.
Yeah, just wait till tomorrow or tonight when she wake up and have nightmares and all that.
So I have little bit of knowledge in MIDI 2.0. I know lots about MIDI 1.0. I've been using MIDI 1.0 since mid-'80s. So I have a surface level knowledge of the new things that MIDI 2.0 purports to be bringing to us. I'm excited about it. I'm hoping to see lots of implementations.
That's
soon.
great. That's great. Then you can start explaining MIDI 1.0 and then we go to 2.0. You don't have to. I think we know what 1.0 is. So Andrew, what does why did it change to 2.0? What happened?
I think, well, the biggest thing that probably happened is that everyone complained about 1.0. And you got to remember that 1.0 was done in original 83. There's been lots of additional things come along to it over the years. There's been, it's simple things that we take for granted now. Like General MIDI was huge when it came out, and then obviously there was the big, challenges with XG and GS MIDI, and then GM2 came out, and every device had, has had that for the last sort of years. But the biggest thing is that people were turning around saying, look, MIDI 1 is very old technology. There are things that we want to be able to do that we haven't really been able to do with MIDI 1. Or people do really weird workarounds. I mean, MP was a really good example of this kind of thing where they took the MIDI 1 standard, did something great with it, but it's probably not something that you would do if you didn't have to do it in the first place.
Yep.
Right? Having channel rotation.
To be fair, I'd like to say that the original designers of MIDI 1.0 were extremely forward-looking in that it has lasted today, and we can do things like MPE and NERPN and things to expand the use of MIDI far beyond what they ever had imagined.
Well, of course, the MPE is basically an expansion of mono mode, which was designed for guitar synthesizers way back when. So, and in fact, one of the drivers of MIDI 2.0 or precursor would be what was it? Giz. Oh God! It was the GWiz Labs, and it was whatever they were proposing. But it had a lot of MIDI 2.0 sorts of things in it, and I can't remember the name right now. It wasn't Gimpy.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I remember?
It'll bug me too. I'll sit there,
But I mean, back when it was invented, 7-bit data. I mean, 127 values. That's more than you could ever use, right?
Well, to be fair, it's more than much hardware continues to produce.
True.
Yeah. Well, and especially when you've got sensors and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of those sensors are very limited. But the technology has come a long way in 40 years. I mean, computers have gone from literally being 8-bit computers to now being 64-bit computers, and you've got all of the keyboard sensors have more range, and so there was things like high resolution CC88 for doing extra resolution on velocity and stuff like that. So there's all these kind of workarounds that have been happening for so long, and so that's one part of it, right? There's been this sort of aspect of, can we do more with it to, we've got to modernize a little bit. The other part was that everyone was going, I have this device and I have this device, and when I plug it in, I've got to spend, significant time mapping everything, or I've got to, it doesn't just connect. And even within products within their own companies, weren't connecting as well as they could be. So this has been also a big thing. These are all of the pain points that general users have wanted for a long time. And there's also the rise of the DAW, which has changed things significantly. When MIDI first came out, the concept of having it all hooked up to a computer was like, oh, that's interesting. And everyone still bought SMPTE tape machines so they could actually record and sync their tracks to, and that was the technology. And then suddenly we went, there's this thing called a sequencer, great, which we're around, but sequencers and great, and then we'll do hardware sequencers. Oh, then we'll have the Atari, and then we'll do all these things. And then we went, oh, actually now DAWs are going to move into audio. And then we're going to have a lot higher resolution in audio. We're down to samples. And then as time goes on, the DAWs have become, and I'm not saying anything anyone probably doesn't really realize, but they became far more centric about things like plugins and stuff like that. So, looking at MIDI, there is that call to say, actually, what we really need to do is bring this into the modern age. But at the same time, we all have equipment. We all have things that we do not want to break. And so you have to make sure that nothing that we've done for 40 years plus breaks as well. And so that's a big part of it.
But why did you choose to make a 2.0 and not a new standard? People could have got interfaces for old stuff.
It's backwards compatible.
Yeah, that's a big reason.
Yeah, but
and I have to...
Yeah.
I will say on that one, that was one of the biggest pushes from especially the your AME companies, which are all your Japanese companies. That's your Korgs, that's your Yamahas, your Rolands, Casios, all Kawais. The big push from them was we need to support a standard which is not going to break existing products and break what a musician uses in their own mind. And if you break that, I mean, look at OSC. OSC is a great standard, right? And it has been around for a long time, but it doesn't have a groundswell, right? And there's lots of applications that use it, and a lot of companies will use it internally, or they'll use it between different types of products. But generally, it's not something that, person walks into, if it's in the US Guitar Center, or person walks into here in Australia Store DJ and can buy something off the shelf, plug it in, and expect it to work, which is a huge chunk of your market, right? You can't forget about that.
And it should be noted that one of the large things of MIDI 2.0 is it's connection agnostic. It doesn't care how that data is being sent. In MIDI 1.0, we have DIN cables, and they are unidirectional, and it's, I don't remember the baud rate. It's not 38.4. What was it?
31.25.
Yeah, 31.25. I knew it was close. And so that was MIDI. Now, of course, we got MIDI over USB, but the MIDI 1.0, it's still unidirectional. You have two tunnels through the USB. But, I know Vince Clarke said this, that he did not use MIDI because the timing was not good enough. And if you listen to Vince Clarke's, especially Vince Clarke's solo work, where he has used all of his analog and the word is escaping me. With all the cables?
Modular
Synth. Thank you. His huge modular synth setup, where everything is triggered with the edge of a voltage falling, and that's his timing. And if you listen to the music that he does, it's so sharp. Like the timing is so sharp on it. And when I do that, if I try that, I can hear the jitter. I can hear, if I'm playing back from MIDI using traditional MIDI, I hear the timing jitter, and I can see it in the printed audio.
I think to be clear, there are multiple things that go into that. So I actually did an interview with him right when Chorus came out, which if Vince Clarke ever sees this, I'm really sorry. I was not sufficiently prepared for that interview. But Chorus was the album, I think, where he was returning to that. He had been using some MIDI sequencing, and he said that people had been complaining about the sound. And on Chorus, he went back to, he actually was still composing in MIDI, but then he would dump things into a Roland, I think it was an MC4, and use that for the actual recording. But I think that this may, if I can, may conflate several different things as analyses of things often do. So MIDI is pretty fast if you're just trying to transmit one note. If you're trying to transmit a chord, then you may get into things. But that's actually not what he was doing most of the time, right? He was working in mono. So, but there are other things that can happen, right? So you can have jitter or timing inefficiencies in interfaces. For a long time, I've been using these Motu interfaces with timestamping, which of course is now a feature of MIDI 2.0. And that makes a big difference. I remember I had been trying to use some Spectrasonics libraries with, what is it, Groove Control, something? Actually, I was just looking at one of these CDs. Drag it out here. No, that's the wrong CD. All right. I still have CDs around here. So basically the idea was it was sort of a Rex sort of format. So it would be triggering a loop, but step by step by step by step. And I had been using that a little bit with a Roland sampler, which I loved, but which didn't have very good timing. And then I got an EMU sampler, the E6400 Ultra, and one of the things they had done in there was to significantly upgrade their timing response. And I could now play those loops from my sequencer into this sampler, and it sounded awesome. So a lot of it has to do, I think, with the response time of the instruments. And some instruments were famously poor at responding. And some instruments have fixed latency, and some instruments have a somewhat variable latency. And so I think my guess actually is that was significantly more of a factor than MIDI itself.
I think you're right, and I think integration has a lot to do with that because I know like the JD800 that I've got sitting over here, it's one of the last synths where it is not integrated, where you have, this is the processor that controls MIDI. Here's the processor that controls the keyboard scanning. Here's the processor that controls the DSP, and they talk to each other, but because it has that dedicated MIDI processor, all it's doing is looking for and processing MIDI, whereas the Roland System 8 up here, it's got one CPU and it's doing everything. It's scanning keyboards, so it sees a MIDI come in, it throws that into the queue and processes that MIDI note when it can get to it. And so there is built-in latency depending on what else the processor is doing because of that level of integration.
Well, I could see how that might be the case. I know that in our case, for instance, we're much more concerned. So that because latency comes from many things, right? Latency, comes to a certain extent because we have a kind of constant callback timer, and things can only happen when that timer clicks. We have audio latency on the output, which we can't do anything about. Certain algorithms may have latency. The thing that we're most concerned about with our synthesizers is consistency of latency. So we have a low latency, but even more than that, we really want stuff to come out the same way every time.
Yeah, and that's what I see when I am playing back MIDI from my DAW and then printing that, and I can see variability in there that is not consistent, and that's what drives me crazy, and I end up going and manually fixing it. But my whole point in going into this was that I think you mentioned was that MIDI 2.0 has that jitter timestamp function. And I wonder if Andrew could talk about that, because that was one of the things I saw. I'm like, oh, yes, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, so there's a thing called jitter reduction timestamp, which, again, I think this goes to what Dan is saying, is that you will get latency, but it's consistent, right? So the jitter reduction timestamp is about saying this next message that we're going to give you is happening at this time. It's good for playback, right? It's good for, I'm going to play back from the DAW to a synth, and I can tell it exactly when to trigger off that next thing. You're still going to, and for also recording, right? So that when I'm playing, I can say, well, when I played you this note and I hit the key on this keyboard, I hit it at this exact time. And so when it gets into the DAW, it goes, well, it's not just the timestamp of the computer time, it's the timestamp coming from the synth itself or from the controller keyboard itself. And so what that's going to fix is going to fix a lot of that kind of record and playback kind of situation. It's the live playing, it's not going to do much for, right? Because when you're playing live, you want that sound to happen as quickly as it receives that, as soon as it receives that note. So you're not going to do much there. But in terms of that playback and record, absolutely, much better timing all around.
And delay is an important aspect of that, right? The price that you pay for that timing consistency is the delay. I have a Yamaha Disclavier, and you can choose two options with it with MIDI. You can have it respond as quickly as possible, in which case its timing is all over the place. Or you can insert a half-second delay, so that because they're actually literally throwing a hammer, right? They're depressing a key and throwing a hammer. And if you want the hammer to get there at the right time, you have to be doing things ahead of time to make that occur. And some synthesis methods may even require that. So, Andrew, I have a question though. Does anyone support that yet?
No, so, and this is sort of an ongoing thing. I mean, part of the ability to support that is going to be the ability to support UMP, right, which is a new universal MIDI packet. So, for those who don't know, obviously MIDI was a stream of 8 bits, right? It's a serial stream. UMP is 32-bit words, right? So we can put more data in there, right? The biggest thing that's been needed to happen with that is we've needed to get that into all the different operating systems, right? So that's the biggest thing you need to be able to do. And at the moment, it's in Mac, it's in Linux, it's in Android, and Windows is in preview, right? And so one of the big things is we're pushing for companies to embrace UMP as when they're doing their next round of products, is to do that. Once we do that, then we can start saying to them, now you've got UMP there, start doing the jitter reduction timestamps, start working with that. So it's a process. It does take time. I'm not expecting to see anything on the market doing that for at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, to be honest.
I know the Montage M supposedly, I think one of the marketing blurbs was that it supports MIDI 2.0, but I don't know to what extent or what it does or what functionality it has or anything about it.
Andrew, technically, if I supported property exchange and I said, no, I'm a MIDI 1.0 instrument, would I support MIDI 2.0?
Technically, yes. I'll get into that because it is confusing, and I haven't gone down into. There was some marketing decisions that I'm not sure that I fully agree with. But,
so basically, if you say property exchange and you get no answer, it's the same as, hey, MIDI 1 only.
Okay. I want to answer a couple of questions. Can I go back to the montage quickly?
Yeah.
So the montage, the main thing that the montage supports is high resolution, right?
Okay.
So the keys on that are 10-bit. So velocity from MIDI 1 protocol to MIDI 2 protocol, right, goes from obviously 7-bit to 16-bit. Different devices, depending on how much their ability to have that kind of signaling, will have that kind of range between 7 and 16. Most of them are going to be about 10-bit. I believe the montage, I'll get my hand slapped if I get this wrong, but I believe the montage is actually 10-bit, and so is the Roland A88 Mark II. Now that is actually significantly
I want to say you're
bigger.
right, because I remember discovering that it was sending through a larger range, but it was actually quantizing between that and jumping between some of the values.
Yeah, it still will. There'll still be a little bit of a jump. Now, initially you think, well, what's the big difference between? If you know your bits, there's a huge difference between 7 and even 10-bit. So you've gone from like 128 steps to 2,024 steps, 2,048 steps or something like that. And I was a bit like, look, can people hear it? What can they do? And we got people in front of the Roland A88 and an application called Ivory 3, which is a piano library, fantastic piano library, right? And they've done a lot of work to support high resolution. And we got people who were composers and pianists. I can't hear it because I am going tone deaf after going to too many concerts in my youth. But we got those people, and they were sitting in front of it, and they're going, "Oh my God, I can hear it." And what we figured out is that what it is when they're playing, like you might have this much range when you're playing, from silence to the loudest on a piano or something. But they're playing in this range here, and so what's happening is when they're playing in that range, is only about 8, maybe 10 velocities that they're actually working with. When they've got moving to MIDI 2,
with 7-bit, you mean?
With 7-bit, yeah, yes. And so when they move to MIDI 2, suddenly they've got 1,000 in that range, or when they're doing 16-bit, but maybe it's like 100 in that range. And so for them, they can hear all that expressivity. They're like, oh my God, I can actually hear that it's different when I'm playing over this kind of thing. And they could be far more accurate about how they wanted to play that. And so it's those subtleties that were really important, especially to that particular group of people. Mm-hmm. They were like, yes, we can really, and then the composers were like, oh, please, when can we have this? And so that's been the biggest problem, is making sure everyone can have it. But yeah, that's where that comes from.
So if the velocity is now much wider bit range,
yeah,
is there also then going to be, I guess, a replacement for MPE where maybe the CCs could also have increased range and you could simply use CCs for individual notes rather than channels?
Yeah, you have per note controllers, and sorry, Andrew, I'll let you.
No.
It turns out I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So yeah, with that, so CC messages are now 32-bit, so 4.2 billion steps. RPNs.
I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I really need 4.3, by the way. 4.2
Well, it's
is just
4.29, I believe
just a
it
little
actually.
bit shy.
Yeah. I need more. I need to be able to count every grain of sand on a beach.
And then I'm going to find the A to Ds for the scanners.
Yeah,
But yeah.
So, RPNs, for example, are now an atomic message. So they go up from being 14-bit to being 32-bit as well.
And that's a big thing, Andrew.
Yes.
The fact of it being an atomic message is awesome, as opposed to sending
Four.
two CC numbers and then CC6, right?
6 to 38. Yeah.
Because and this gets back into MIDI being serial. This is I don't know. I've been wrestling with this recently, wondering about solutions for sending large numbers of CCs for things, and you can use NRPNs, for instance, but they're so fragile. They're so fragile in that stream because you send this value message, and what's it attached to? Well, it's attached to the last things you processed, and what were those, and what happens if you move things around? And anyway, so atomic message is awesome.
Yeah, and makes a huge, and a lot of the profile, which I'll get into because there's so much to get into. There's a large chunk of stuff. One thing I'll say is there's a huge MIDI 2 is a large, wide variety of things, and we have to try to work with a lot of the manufacturers to say, look, yes, you can do all of these things. Just focus on this one. We'll get to the other ones later. But I wanted to jump back to the per note controllers. So that's a big area now. Is you've got on a MIDI 2 note on message, for example, you've got a couple things. You've got what's called attributes, right? So your note on has extra information, and it can be things like a specific pitch, an exact pitch, or it can be what we call a note on, like articulations. So again, for orchestral libraries and stuff like that, you can say, well, I've hit this note on, but the bow is down, and it's a vibrato, and it's this particular round robin sound that I particularly wanted. There's a lot more information you could have, but also you do have this ability to have per note controllers, which again is kind of exactly the way that what MPE was trying to do, which was the XYZ on a controller. So
The rolling.
Yeah, the rolling. But the big thing is that you're now doing this in one channel.
Right.
Right? You don't have to be doing, actually, I'm in MPE mode and I'm doing multiple
Which is
channel
really a
rotation.
nasty hack.
You don't have to throw away everything after the 14th note.
Yeah. Or cycle back through, but it also means that DAWs can, support it far more easily. I mean, it's actually quite a lot of effort for a DAW or a device to. I mean, there are libraries and it helps, but there's actually quite a bit of work to support MPE properly. And there's the guy who does Moforte, Pat Skandalis. He does a lot of work with MPE over the years, and he said one of the biggest problems was that a lot of companies say they support MPE, but they don't support it exactly the same way as everybody else because it's difficult to get right. And so trying to make sure that everyone's kind of doing the right thing. And there's been a lot of cleanup in MPE. A lot of devices have got a lot better, but there was a bit of a wild west there for the early part of it.
Fortunately, very few shootings.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talking about mapping, that's the thing that really, I read it and I'm like, well, that sounds like an ideal situation, but it really makes me wonder how that mapping is going to occur, because I know when I map a controller now, there's a lot of personal preference. I like this slider to control this and so on. I assume there's going to be, here's a control surface. I've got these controls that in most cases are going to map to something that makes sense. But if I've got two disparate pieces of equipment that have never seen each other from different manufacturers, how are they going to map? And then more.
Are you intending that as a softball question? I'm just asking, but because Andrew has his answer ready.
I want to hear this answer.
I do, but I think Dan and Cork can answer this one. I have to be honest because they've done this, and then I'll follow up because I think that's actually important.
Yeah. So we support MIDI Property Exchange with my group's synthesizers, the Wave State, Mod Wave, Multipoly, and also the Op6, which is kind of based on a similar platform but is from Core. And we support them through the plugin versions of those as well. And the idea is that you can plug in a key stage controller. I'm not sure, Andrew. I've never actually seen another controller with support for Property Exchange and MIDI CI that does this, but you may have done that as well. And I know that we tested on MIDI 2.0 Workbench and that sort of thing. But you can plug in the key stage, and the key stage, by dint of MIDI 2.0 and Property Exchange and MIDI CI, will display the names of the knobs on the knobs of the key stage. So you plug it into a wave state, and it says, oh, this is the sample knob, this is the shape knob, and they come up. The values are shown, the current values are shown, and the name of the program is shown, and all of that happens by virtue of MIDI 2.0 and Andrew and others' work. So anyway, that's a summary, and it's early days, but it's pretty lovely to see it work.
I'll extend on this because
please do, absolutely. As I say, I'm not actually involved in the implementation of any of this, although I did work to get it working at the NAMM show, and this goes into a story very briefly that it took me and a couple of other engineers almost an hour to discover that our problem was a bad MIDI cable. This only involved a few software installations before we figured that out.
I have been there.
Yeah. So there's a couple things happening, and I don't know if Dan may not even be aware of some of the things that are happening.
Probably not.
So, Property Exchange is done over SysX. So there's layers, right? So you have you've got Universal SysX, which everyone has probably used in various points in time. On top of Universal SysX is a thing called MIDI CI, which is Capability Inquiry, which is a discoverability kind of communication protocol that says, look, tell me about your device, tell me if it's got profiles, tell me if it's got Property Exchange. There is a difference and a reason why there's a difference between the two. And then there's a third thing as well, which is called Process Inquiry, and which is mainly because we wanted a P name, because everything was a P name. And no, seriously, there was protocol negotiation, profile configuration, Property Exchange, and Process Inquiry. And the Process Inquiry does an interesting thing, and people don't really think about this one, which is Property Exchange can tell you the list of controllers that your device has, what CC messages, what NRPNs, RPNs, per note controllers, whether you support aftertouch, all of those kinds of things, and it gives it to you in what's called gives it to you in JSON, which if you're used to computing terms, it's human readable, but it's also machine readable, and there's a format for that, and it says, look, this is what you should be expecting, right? So you get all that information, and then it's up to the application or another piece of hardware to process that and understand it and decide. It's also given it to you in order of preference from the device. In other words, what's the most important thing for this device to be showing you at the time, right? So you can override that. That's up to you as a user, but at least you know what it is that you've got. That's the biggest messaging we need to give, right? You don't have to be dealing with, I've got to go through a manual and figure out the way something works. So the other thing with process inquiry is, okay, I've told you what they are, but how do I tell you what the values are, right? Now, Korg does it a little differently because they made their design before we had these things out for everybody. But process inquiry says, please give me, I'm going to ask you, and you're going to do me almost like a MIDI message dump of all your current values. What are your CCs? What are your RPNs? What are your NRPNs? There's a bunch of different things that it can give you for this particular channel. And so the idea is it's kind of like a snapshot of your current settings on your device. All right, so that's certainly one aspect. One of the things that we're working on is after we did this control list, which is what it's called, is we had a big conversation with a lot of people who are using things like NKS. One of the big people that one of the bigger companies involved in doing a lot of this work is Native Instruments, right? And so if you've used any of their devices, very similar to Keystage in the fact that you plug it in, you get a lovely screen. It shows you the plugin that you're currently looking at, shows you the what they would consider the top elements of those particular of that plugin and all the rest of it. So this is a fairly common thing, and this kind of concept of having 8 knobs on a device with a couple of screens underneath it. You'll see it repeated in Novation have it, and obviously Korg have it. I've got one of the Melbourne Instruments rotor controls. They all work on this kind of, which is a great device if you ever get the chance to play with one of those. And so one of the things we're working on, and then this would be in the MIDI 2 protocol only. So this is maybe a hint for me. This is me having a little bit of a poke to try and get Korg to use the UMP. But is to have similar functionality as a standard, right? MIDI 2 is not really anything. There is some new stuff in there, but generally this is all things that people have done for years, but they've done it in proprietary ways. And we really need to move away from that because as anyone who tells you who has hardware and they go, well, I've just built the Cubase version of the interface that I have to build, and then I'm going to go build the Logic version, and then I'm going to go build the live version, and then the Bitwig version, and then this version. And one of the big issues is that, so much development costs go into having integrations into all these different systems. So we're trying to say, how can we have this integrated in a standard way so that it's all these things? And so one of the things we're looking at is having it very similar to NKS, where we have a message which says, this is the label for your knob. This is the current value of the knob. This is the, all the things. This is the color, right? This is the name. And then being able to page through back and forth. Again, this is nothing new, but having this in a standard. And then one of the things with that is then it means that it doesn't matter if you then take a device and then say, I'm going to go plug it into the montage, or I'm going to plug it into Arturia's lovely keyboard. I can't think of it off the top of my head, and I should know the white
Keylab?
one.
Keylab,
yeah. So having, and I'm not speaking for any of these companies that I don't know what they're doing. I want to be very clear about that. But the whole idea is that this is consistent, and so you can just plug it in. Now, it doesn't mean people can't override it, right? So if you get into Cubase and you say, I'm going to do my quick controls up, and this is what they are, and they're pointing to these things up here. So it can be based on the focus, or it can be based on whatever the user decides. So MIDI is prescriptive in a lot of ways, but it isn't trying to tell musicians how to do their stuff. We have to be a little bit, this is the messaging, this is what we expect. How you get the messaging there, that's up to you. But I think that's going to be create a huge impact, because it also means that for software tools that people like to use that aren't common, it means that you don't have to kind of build a driver. Like I know a lot of people use Reaper, for example, but a lot of integration isn't in with Reaper. So it's kind of good that they could go and integrate the basics of it, and then suddenly it just works for them, and then people buy a device and plug it in and go. And that's kind of where it's trying to get at.
I could see DAW manufacturers incorporating almost controllers in software, because I mean, if you see like Yamaha used to have the Montage Connect or the ModiX Connect plugin for a DAW, and it did kind of proprietary backdoor through other channels and so on, would allow you to manipulate the synthesizer from within the DAW. And it was, I like you said, prescriptive, but not restrictive. It was restrictive because you could only work with it the way it wanted you to work with it. But the idea that a non-proprietary control surface, that it might just be something that's here's parameters of the patch you're working on. Here's the name of the patch, and it doesn't care what's connected to, and you just look at a channel and you could see exactly what patch is loaded on the synth, and if you want to adjust the filter on it, it just does it. I mean, you could do that with a CC, but you know what I mean, where you could have all that functionality. It almost turns your outboard hardware could be appearing and operating like a plugin within the DAW.
Exactly. And in fact, that's a big, I mean, so DAWs, as I was saying before, DAWs happened and plugins happened. And one of the big things is that as more musicians have come on board, younger musicians especially, they come on board and they expect their outboard gear to work exactly like you just described. They expect it to work like that. And they don't understand. Well, what do you mean? I've got to understand what 0 to 127 means, or worse still, hex. I've got to,
or
what's
which
the hex
CC.
of
You twist this knob, and which CC is it? Who knows?
Well, and so when you work in a plugin, you don't look, and you look at your automation lanes. You're not looking at CC. Oh, it's CC, 53 or whatever. You're looking at, oh well, this is the filter, right? Mm-hmm. You're looking at this is the ADSR envelope that I'm working on, or whatever it is that you're automating. You want things to device like that. One of the other things that we worked on, and we did release, and again, I think this is sort of a groundswell, and we realized that some of these things will take, what did I say the other day? It takes 10 years to be an overnight success. Is this thing called get and set device state. And so the whole point of that is it's a property exchange thing, and it's the equivalent of a system dump, right? But the idea is that when you're working on a session and you say, well, that session, I have this particular setup on my synthesizer that, maybe that's not the one I currently use, but I want to know that when I come back to that session, that it's going to be that. So I can do like I said, it's called a get state, just like a system dump. I'm going to do a system dump. And then I can go back to that device and say, oh, what's your current state when I reload the session? And it can say, well, actually, this session is using this state, this existing state, or it's using this new state. Which one do you want? And you might go, no, actually overwrite what I've done on the synth because that's not what I want. And then that way, when you go back and play your setup, it's going to play exactly the way it was when you left it.
Right.
And I think people forget about that kind of stuff because plugins always come back to exactly the same way. So this concept, we could put that in hardware as well.
I've for years ended up just putting CCs that could, or just raw data, recording a program change at the beginning of a MIDI track to put it where I need it to be for that individual track for that instrument. You know where I could see this? It just occurred to me is in live, you could take a MIDI track that is playing live. You could have it the music, but you could also just have it connected to a lighting controller. And you could create your lighting show within your DAW, for that matter, and have it synchronized to the music. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care what it's connected to.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
To get and set state, are those limited to declared parameters?
No, it's a blob. I can see Dan's mind going,
No, because that's an issue, right? So we
Yeah.
have the way that we have implemented our editors is that they are really truly remote editors for the synthesizers, right? So they don't have any idea of state. It's a UI. It is a UI for what's on the synth. And so, currently our solution, which I think actually works pretty well, is that if you have the hardware, you can spend $50 and get the plugin, and that works exactly like a plugin, without having to do anything else that's fancy. But the whole issue of getting and recalling state is, I think, that's an issue. It's something I'm interested in. So yeah. And it's nice that it's a blob and not just declared parameters.
yeah, I mean, you can do it whatever you like. It's up to you, but you could return anything you like for state, because I know we're getting into the weeds of it, but that's something that we wanted to make sure that, again, prescriptive, not restrictive. So, wanted to make sure that you can do
So
that.
technically, what you're saying, you could have it so that when this MIDI track is enabled and played back, it's selecting this preset, but then it's making adjustments. So this is the filter, this is the echo, and so on, because that's all part of that state. Is that true?
Well, technically,
Yeah.
it could be the entire preset, and
Well,
that's
sure, yeah.
what Andrew and I were just talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be the whole machine if you wanted to. So the state, get and set device state allows you to pick various parts, but you can be the whole machine.
So
right?
you could compose something, send me a file, a Cubase project file. I could load it, and it would play that without the preset even being in my wave state.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, as Andrew was saying, that's exactly what happens right now with plugins, right?
Sure,
The plugin
yep.
state is saved and you have to make sure that actually happens, but the plugin state is saved with the DAW project. And so if I send that project to you and you happen to have all of the plugins that are required, then it just comes up and works.
Right.
And the thing is that there are plugins. I think SoundQuest MIDIQuest, for instance, I think does this from a SysX standpoint.
Yeah.
And so you can insert their plugin, or some of the Sound Tower. I think Sound Tower still makes plugins that do this, that are based on SoundQuest MIDIQuest. And they will do the same thing. They'll capture all of the SysX that's required to create a sound, but they still will rely on the instrument being in a state to receive that SysX and various other things that might interfere with that. So it's still fragile. So it's lovely to have that. And I like the blob answer, Andrew.
Well, and again, we looked at a lot of those kinds of things. And one of the things we wanted to make sure of was that you didn't, because when you send blobs over SysX, and especially in MIDI 1, it's even over
big.
USB, it's big, it can be big. You want to make sure that we can actually have things where you look it up and say, well, tell me about that blob. Does it, so you don't send the information if you've turned it off and gone to bed, woke it up in the morning and it's exactly the same thing. You don't have to do it that way. You can still only send it if there's a difference between what you have and what you want. Yeah. So there's lots of cool little things like that we're working on. I mean, we're working on. I mean, one of the other big areas that we are looking at a lot is a thing called profiles. And so profiles. The biggest thing about profiles is that it's that whole concept of you're this device and I'm this device. Make sure that the messages match, right? That's a very simplified thing. I mean, couple of the big profiles that we're working on at the moment, we've released a couple already. There's one called the piano profile, which, and Dan might appreciate this one, is it says not only are these particular messages used for things like lid position or you know, how you use the actual sustain pedal, because they vary between things. But it also says how you should send a velocity curve over MIDI, right?
So it's kind of like MIDI learn, but automated.
But automated. And all you do is you just say, we're both going to support these things, and they're very short messages, so they're not big, complicated messages. We're both going to support these things. We'll do some very quick things to see how you work, but generally speaking, we're going to just set it up and away you go. Now, this will also work with plugins, of course, right? And so we're doing a bunch of work with getting these kinds of profiles all the way through. And one of the things, because one of the things that you have with pianos, and especially I know in synth land we don't tend to worry too much. I mean, pianos are important, but we don't tend to focus a lot. But certainly these are, probably 80% of MIDI market is things like home pianos and that kind of thing. And one of the things is you can pick up and I'm not going to mention brand names because I'll get in trouble if I do that. But if I can pick up, particular brand name of piano, and there's piano education, right? It doesn't sound right because the velocities coming through on MIDI are set up differently, right? From one brand to another brand.
Yeah.
Right? And so you play back a lovely MIDI concerto piece or whatever, it'll sound wrong. You play it on, you do record it on one device, and then you take Dan's lovely Disclavier and you play it on that. It'll sound off.
It's not just pianos. I come across that all the time, just playing patches, because I have I can't say what it is. I have a synthesizer over here that I really like the keybed on that I use to play lots of other things, but its velocity curve doesn't necessarily match. And so the sounds are different. I either end up having to adjust it or pound it or play it lightly because there isn't that matching.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so this is exactly it. So the whole idea is that, the piano profile enabled, it says, we're going to use the curve in this way, which fixes so many things, even in playback, but also just in learning and all those things. And so that's a really important one that we're doing a lot of focus on. The other one we're doing a lot of work on is drums at the moment. So, you go pick up your drum kit and you go, great, I'm going to use the drum kit. And then you go plug it into your DAW, and the plug-in notes don't match the drum notes, or you don't know how they're all going to play, or the tweaking that you want to do on a sound is they're different. So having the ability to kind of say, actually, I know we're both drums, but we're going to work in this kind of more restrictive way. So this is where it does the restrictive come in. It means that there's nothing stopping people from doing their own configurations. But it does stop the whole, I plug something in, it doesn't work, and I've spent, I spend an hour or half an hour remapping everything, and then I've lost all of my creative drive, right? That's really important to make sure that goes away. But yeah, so that's another big one that we're working on as well in the background.
And I think about the issue that I keep thinking, knowing how the development of software and even just firmware works, is MIDI 1.0 is so well known, and the companies know exactly how to implement it. It's very simple. MIDI 2.0 is completely new, and it's not really the Wild West. There are standards documents, but I suspect it's going to take time before we see good implementations of it, and there are going to be growing pains as people implement things maybe not entirely correctly in the beginning.
Yeah, look, yes and no. I will say that as far as I'm aware, every large manufacturer has some MIDI 2 work going on. I won't speak for all of them, obviously, because that's up to them to announce that. And a lot of them are realizing that it is that work, and that they're putting that into their next round of products, right? or they're just dipping their toe in the water, or they just want to wait. I mean, as I said, there's one of the big holdups is waiting for Windows and their drivers. That's been we did the initial stuff to do I mean, we talked about this in 2020, but we had to wait for class compliance. I think someone mentioned that in the chat. The class compliance is a big aspect, especially under USB, even though we have network to MIDI. So that's been very slow getting that into the next version of Windows. And we had a bunch of things where we put stuff out and realized it wasn't quite right, and we had to go back and make it better. So yeah, you're right. There's been quite a bit of teething issues. But in terms of development, you'll be surprised how many people. There's quite a fair few companies that internally run UMP, for example, but they downgrade it to MIDI 1 before it goes out. Right? And there's big and small companies. But one of the things that we did quite a lot of we being there's myself and Franz Dieter from Canadian Instruments, Armanote as a company, there's been a fair few different people, is providing commercially open source tools, right? So that companies don't have to go through a big learning phase to get things done, or big coding phase, so they can chop, I would hope, 3 to 6 months off their development time just by doing that. But it is something, it's happening, but there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the background because I think everyone's kind of just making sure they've got it right. Especially, you got to remember, especially the big Japanese companies, they're very, as much as they have been the biggest push, they've pushed a lot on MIDI 2. They've been some of the biggest support for it. But they have very big, what's the word I'm looking for? They have very big support needs, and they've got to make sure that when they put a product out, that it has to work. They can't have things broken. So they will do stuff, but they're not going to put it out to public until they're 100% sure that they're happy with it.
And the synthesizer community is notoriously intolerant of product going out with known bugs. They really don't like it.
That's it.
And they're very vocal about it.
Yeah, exactly. just a little. Still, and I can understand why, but that's the nature of it.
So what you're saying is to all the manufacturers that may be watching this video live or recorded, is that all your competitors are doing it, so if you're not, you better get to it.
Well, yes, but I also have to say that, because we work with a lot of these people day in, day out. I mean, MIDI Association is very busy in terms of, we have a lot of meetings during the weeks, and even though I can say for every specification that you've seen that's probably got 30 pages in there, there's probably been 300 or 400 pages written too, of ideas that people have put forward and discussions that have had and all the rest of it. I mean, and there are big names. We're not, so in terms of it's happening, it's just not the immediate happening, and I've been impatient. I have to say, I've been impatient for the last couple of years. And I was like, why can't it happen sooner? But that's just the nature of the industry.
I mentioned the forethought and the foresight of the original MIDI 1.0 developers, in that it is still a relevant standard. I mean, how many networking standards from the 1980s still exist today? And I can think of 3, and MIDI's one of them.
Yeah.
Well, RS-232 and 4022. But
yeah.
But I mean, there's not much. And so in reading through the MIDI 2.0, I can see that same level of forethought going in there. Like, okay, we need to be able to consider things that have not been conceived of yet and make it expandable so that it can support things in the future that way, and it's very evident throughout the standard.
Part of my role is to prototype and to come up with ideas, which is, if you can have a plum job, that's it. I have to be honest with you, right? I mean, I'm very fortunate in that way. And so one of the things that I have as a sitting on the back burner, and the industry is not ready for it yet, but it's sitting there, is a full, sorry, excuse me, is the ability for a hardware device under property exchange to self-describe its own visual editor, right? And have that all, so this is also to edit things that may not be editable by a MIDI message like a CC or an RPN, so being able to have all the communication through. And so I have this within, and this is unfortunately, I have the workbench, MIDI workbench, which allows people to, there's a public version of that, and there's a MIDI association version of that, which has got experimental things in there, which I can't give out because the way the MIDI association works. And in that version, I can plug in devices that it's never seen before, and it will pop up a whole thing which has got, ADSR envelopes and knobs and sliders, and you edit those, and they edit the device in semi-real time, and if it's a CC message, it does all of that. The beauty about all of that is that, if you think about that in terms of this whole concept that your hardware device should act as a plug-in, it's kind of like being a hardware device being able to plug in and provide an interface that a user can use, but also it's synchronized, right? So if you if you go to the device and you change the knobs, then it appears on the thing, and it's a great experiment, but we've got to get all the ground stuff done first. And it's easy for me to do because I don't have quality assurance things that I need to worry about. I just need to play and have fun with it, so that it's a very different world.
And then because we have that hardware agnostic network layer, where we're going to have is cloud hardware. You want to rent some time on a Jupiter 8 over the internet, route your MIDI.
Right.
I'm sure that someone provides that service now.
They do.
You think?
They do.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Because I saw services like that for Studio Gear a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Andrew,
Well-
it's what you're describing with our current editors, right, act that way, but the great advantage that you're describing is that we wouldn't have to write the editor. Or rather, we would kind of have to design. We would have to design the editor, but we wouldn't have to deliver a piece of software, which was the editor. The editor
right.
would be encapsulated within the device.
Yeah.
Now,
well,
are you able
yeah.
to I don't know if it would be in the profile stage or if it would be in the property exchange stage, but to modify how that editor is going to appear based on the hardware that it's being presented?
Yes. So
Well,
there's
that's what
actually,
you're saying. You're saying you define it. You say, I've got 17 envelopes, and they're named this, and they have these parameters, and
they're laid out in this way.
And they're laid out in this way. Yeah.
It's an interesting problem, like something with the montage where you have all these different parts, and each of those is a synthesizer, and each of those can have elements, or that could be FM, or it could be So how do you represent all of that complexity that is so unique to that individual instrument?
Working with a guy called Kia, and he has written a software called KDX, which he presented to the MIDI Innovation Awards this year. I think it's called KDX Automate, and I'll feel awful I've got that wrong. He has written Montage M software that works on the web browser that does exactly this kind of thing. And it is interesting because the Montage is an amazing machine. It is a beast of a machine, and it's the extreme end of a device. Whether look, we should be able to support devices that range from your little tiny, that kind of hardware devices is one of my test devices, which is just a little, synth on the side, to the Montage. We should be able to support that. Whether we support 100% of the montage, that's a different question. Or have the ability to support 100% of the montage. I'd like to say yes, but we're a long way off that, and that's a really good example of how complicated some of these things can get,
I mean,
and you've got to be able to support it.
Yeah, the wave state's another good example. I mean, the synthesis engine is so different from anything else. You have your timing lane, your pitch lane, and so on, where that is core to the engine of the sound creation engine. And I struggle to see how a property exchange could accurately represent that functionality or map it.
Property exchange has, without getting, yeah, I mean, we could get into the weeds, but property exchange is what I would call as a partially self-describing interface. Okay, so the way you have a couple of things with property exchange, you have MA defined or MA and RMA defined resources, which are kind of like, if you think about this as like APIs, I'm going to make an API request and get a response. Very similar. And you have this resource, and you can say, okay, first thing I want is the list of channels, and the channels come back and they give you some information. And then from there's a bunch of what's called links, resource links within that. And so you can then say, well, from the channel, I'm going to get the program list, or I'm going to get this kind of, I'm going to get a control list. But also from that, you can also say, I'm going to get this other kind of data set, and it has this role, this kind of concept behind it. And if you know the role, then you know how to actually take that information and display it. And so this is what we're talking about, this UI role, this sort of GUI role, is you can take the role of GUI and say, okay, well, I know which kind of information I need to call. I know how to call that information. I know how to display that information. And that information describes where it's going to be. How do you then link off to other things? Can it be also updated on the fly? So if I change something on the device, I can update how that automatically displays. And it is complicated, right? And so and this is why the industry is not ready to put this out in the public yet. But one of the things with that is that the interface for that needs to be programmed up once, right? So in your DAW of choice, it might even be a library, right, that someone can use. And you say, well, this is how you do it. Integrate this into your software, and it's done like this once, right? The hardware then has to make the decision about what it's going to provide. It may not provide 100% of the functionality because it's not the best experience, or it might provide everything. So I have UIs, for example, which is for global settings, right? And so I can get that off the baseline and say, oh, okay, well, here's a pop-up a page which is for global settings. Great. Okay, and then I edit those things and adjust the global settings, and then separately I'll have something for the channels. So you have this kind of ability to choose which information you may want. I mean, the other thing that I'm experimenting with is things like getting documents from the hardware, right, and files through a file system, which has been done before. This is not certain hardware has done this, but the idea is that you can, directly from your device get the latest documentation about some feature, or you can turn around and say, I'm in this particular section, pop up some context-sensitive documentation for this particular thing. Montage is a great example of the kind of thing where you're like, well, I don't really know what this bit means. Montage manuals that like that thick. So there is this kind of concept of being able to do all of that. That we could. That's with future.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And the thought that the universal GUI interface could have context-sensitive tooltips, even that just pop up based on whatever the synthesizer says it describes that control.
And we've been doing. I'm really into that sort of thing. So on Chronos, I actually used a tool because I was working with Adobe's. They're allowing it to limp along, but it's a program called FrameMaker, which almost no one who hasn't made manuals knows about. partially, and I'm looking at Adobe when I say that. But they do continue to develop it, albeit only for Windows at this point. I first used it on a Spark station.
Wow.
And then on a Mac, and then under emulation on Windows. But anyway, fantastic program, and very organized towards structured documentation. And so one of the things that you can do is to output HTML. And I was using a third-party tool when I was doing this for the Kronos. It also has its own built-in stuff. But the Kronos contains all of the manuals except for some screenshots are in the Kronos and are context sensitive based on the page that you're on. So you press help and it brings something up, and it's literally all of the manuals are there. And, the manuals are designed with hyperlinks for cross references. And so it supports that. And I added some other stuff using that third-party tool and using frame makers that you could bop between pages in ways that might not be easy on a small screen, for instance. And with the current plugins, we didn't do this for WaveState native, but we've done it for the rest of them. We have context-sensitive help, and I love it. And so for every parameter that you can see on the screen, and for some things that aren't technically parameters, we have little text strings. And so, being able to communicate those to a DAW, that would be fantastic. People still don't read them, by the way, but
I read them.
I like to know that they're there. Sorry.
No, I disagree. I think people will read them if they didn't have to go through and find it in a 500-page manual.
Well, I'm saying from my observation, people still don't read the help strings that show up on the bottom of their screen. But hopefully more will. And part of it is trust, right? Trust that it's interesting and valuable information. And I think that many people simply don't have that trust in documentation for, in many cases, good reason. I try not to give any good reasons for not trusting the documentation. Or trust. It's not even simply trusting that it's there, or trusting that it's factual, but trusting that it's helpful. So try to make this stuff helpful.
I'm seeing in the chat, Davina Duckworth says people shouldn't have to derive functionality by hacking into an instrument's data stream, and that is exactly what's happening with the System 8. It's never been published. It's just all the panel functionality back and forth over MIDI is just like the montage on a separate MIDI channel, and it's all sysx and binary undocumented data blobs. And there's actually a project, a guy sat down and tweaked every knob and figured out what was what inside the data stream, has created an editor for that thing. But how nice it would be to have, I don't know if it's a middleware or something that would give MIDI 2.0 property exchange discovery with legacy instruments like that you could then have that functionality with this. And I don't know if that's a plugin or if it's a third-party product.
I think I could see a third-party product doing that. I think one of the big differences between sysx editing and property exchange and is the subscription model, right? And so this as I was talking about it before, is the concept where, and you see this with a lot of editors in the KDX editor that I was talking about with the montage earlier. It has this thing, right? It's great. You can do a dump. You can ask the device. You get all the information, and it presents all the things, and you can visually slide it, right? And that when you do those things, it's sent to the device, and you see it on there. The problem is that people dual use between devices and not, right? So they'll go, oh, I'm working on the computer, and then they'll turn around and they'll play something, and they'll go, oh, I'll tweak something. As soon as you tweak something, that then doesn't go back up to the application, all right?
Even with,
and so, not always.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. No. Sorry. In this KDX editor, because it's just using standard sysx, which is all about grabbing data. So unless it's constantly saying what's the latest data,
well, sysx, there's bulk dump, and then there's also individual.
But you have to you have to
be aware of them.
Yeah, in this case,
and
it's rolling cloud.
Has to support them.
And and it's not subscription. It's rolling cloud doing its proprietary stream and both bidirectional stream that is updating it constantly. But again, massively proprietary and undocumented.
And so the whole point of the property exchange subscription, which not like a paid subscription, is that you say, oh, this particular resource of property exchange resource, every time it updates, I want you to tell me how it's updated, right? They can just send a little bit of information to say, oh, I've changed this parameter. And so, and I think Korg uses this. Off the top of my head, I should know better. But the point is that the idea behind that is that your two things remain in sync. And so I can work on the computer, turn around to the keyboard, work back on the computer, or even between devices. And that, I think, is something that a lot of sysx dumps and a lot of sysx editing doesn't allow for. Some do, but very, very few devices have that ability to kind of say, well, actually, I know you want me to give you updated information. They'll give you CCs and those things, but of a lot of big devices, they don't have, very few parameters, and they might have 2,000 parameters, right? They're not mapped to CC.
Yeah. In my example with the roll-in with a third party, you need a third party application that maintains state with the synth, and then you can subscribe to that.
Yeah.
And the other way, the way that we do it now, right, is that the editor has no idea of state. It is. Again,
Live.
it's literally a second UI for
Right.
the UI and the synth. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter where you change something from. You change something in the editor, you change something in the synth. It's all changing stuff on the synth, and the editor always knows what's going on. But
And is
the
that just
weakness of that is that the
TCP/IP
editor,
stream bidirectional between the editor and the synth?
Yeah. I mean, like if you were to change something, let's see. What are things where you can change something? So CCs, for instance, are something that can directly reach in and change the mod knob states, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so even on the synth, I could send just a normal CC from somewhere, and it's going to be updating a parameter, a literal parameter that can be stored in the synth. So the synth has to know about that. So that the synth and its UI actually communicate to each other, and they have to communicate bidirectionally. And so we do the same thing from the computer. It means that everything is its own layer, and things have to talk to each other over standardized methods.
And it
one of
works.
the things sorry?
And it works, and I love the wave state editor. I when I first got the wave state, I'm like, I love this thing, but it needs an editor because there's just too much to cram into what control surfaces you have. And getting the editor for the wave state made it a much more usable synth, or at least in terms of sound design for me.
Yeah, we had something like the editor when we were developing it, and that was actually part of our debugging for the editor itself. But I use that very little.
Really?
Yeah, partially because I really wanted to. There's the eat my own dog food thing, right? But I didn't consider it dog food. I was very fast on that because we also had a simulator for the front panel, and I just used the simulator for the front panel to do all.
I was fast on it, and sorry, Henrik, you're gonna have to get your hammer out. We're off topic. We're heading off topic. But I was fast on it as long as I was using it regularly, and I found if I went away and didn't use it for a while, I'm forgetting my shift key presses, functions, and so on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So Andrew, I'm curious about. I don't know if you've written publicly about your idea for this kind of generative editor environment.
I've done demos of it. I haven't, and I've done demos publicly. I've done a few publicly demos. Early days of I've obviously updated it as things have changed, but it's been put on the back burner for a couple of reasons. Is because we need to get some of the other stuff kind of up and running. But yes, it's there. There's videos of it.
Is your idea that it can the hardware define graphic editor paradigms for it, or does it have to rely on the paradigms that are built into the system?
Yes,
it's extensible.
Yes, but not. But yeah, I'm going to be careful about how much detail I go into because, as you know, with MIDI association, we can talk about what we're working on, but not how it works until we actually release something. So maybe we might talk about that offline.
All right, we can do that.
Yeah. But I can share with an example. I can get into it, but it's an idea of, and there's other people who need to go through that as well. So I don't, it's an idea of what we can do. I don't want to prescribe how that works here.
That kind of comes from what I was talking about, where we have unique user interface aspects of individual hardware, that those unique things which may not even exist today may be able to be implemented if there is a definition language that may include graphic representation of the UI and the functionality of it, and that can be transferred as part of that property exchange.
Exactly. That is the intention. That is
fascinating. Wow. This stuff is really cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's we have a lot of, like I said, I have a lot of fun putting it all together and experimenting and trying to find new things. I think now it's kind of, I've got the amount of things that I want to do with it. It's merely up to now other companies saying we actually really want this kind of functionality in the world of MIDI too, and that's kind of been my role for the last couple of years, has been far more supportive. But there's lots of good
Dan,
ideas.
go right ahead with implementing that new holographic interface, because it's going to be supported. That secret thing you're working on.
I'm also thinking about the pianos, and I would be interested to read those documents. I should look up. I'm not even sure who are. I'm not sure that Andy is still functioning as a TSB board member or not. But the fascinating thing to me about trying to equalize velocity response is that even acoustic pianos, of course, don't have a standardized velocity response, and that simply agreeing on a software structure for what, for instance, velocity 97 or 97.30 represents is, well, let's just say it's not completely sufficient, because you need the voicing, what we call the voicing, the sound design, the sample sets, and the programming around them to support that as well. And so it'd be interesting to me to see how you define what that should mean.
Yes.
I mean, you mean beyond having just a lookup table that 97 on this is equivalent to 64 on this, and to do
what do any of those things mean? And we've talked about, for instance, trying to do voicing by standardizing. You sample the piano and the force that you're applying to the piano key, and then we apply the same force to our controller, and we look at the output and we match things up that way.
What's the weight of the piano key, and what's the weight of the hammer mechanism, and how does that affect the velocity? And
yeah, well, if you do it the way I was describing, you kind of abstract all of that stuff, and so you can just say, you hit it this way on this, it produces the sound. You hit our thing this way, it produces the same sound. You could do that, but the difficulty is that different acoustic pianos are going to do different things, and the interpretation of the velocity. And it seems it's impossible to make it completely accurate, and you might not want it to be completely the same between two different instruments, because that robs everyone of their differentiations. And so anyway, but you could at least get some sort of approximation. So I'm just curious to know how that's defined. I don't know if you can talk about that, or maybe that's too much for this particular conversation.
No, I was trying to answer a question there. But I'll here we go. I can answer it as best I can. I'm not on the piano profile working group. I do read the specifications.
I could just look at the spec for my own knowledge. I should probably do that.
Do that. But I think the idea is oh god, I'm going to get this wrong, and I'm going to apologize. So
well, I don't mean to put you on the spot there. It's okay.
But the whole point is, if you think about things in terms, I think it's not hammer speed. It's in expected volume. And their name escapes me. When you've got score, and it's PF and FFF and PFF and all the rest of it, which is those are assigned to the idea is that they have different velocities.
Sure.
Okay.
And so the whole idea is because what ends up happening is that some companies, for example, have that range goes only the highest velocity, the highest thing you can hit on the actual hammer velocity you can hit on a piano only goes up to 112 in a 112 on the MIDI velocity, right? And then they only start at like 16 at the bottom or 10 at the bottom,
Sure.
right? And so the whole point is that whereas others go all the way up to 127. So when you're playing on one, it doesn't sound the same. So there are still characteristics. I mean, each piano still has a sound which is unique to that piano. All right? That's why you buy that. That's why you buy that,
This part
right?
I get, but yeah.
Yeah, so they do a lot of work on that. Now, in terms of how the deeper levels of that, I don't really feel confident going into more than that.
Well, that makes sense to me. It's just that it's going to translate differently on different pianos, and that's probably what you want. But what you don't want is something like what would happen when you took an original DX7, for instance, and controlled it from, for instance, a JX8P,
which had a highest velocity of 100.
Yeah, and so you could produce all of these more extreme sounds when you were controlling it via MIDI than from the local keyboard.
Yeah,
which means this stuff didn't sound right.
And we're going to have something completely new and different because since the dawn of time, these synthesizer keyboards determine velocity by having two separate sensors, as you well know, and it just measures the time between the two of them. So if the time is this many milliseconds between the two, we know the key is moving at this velocity, and that's determining the velocity of the key press.
But not all keyboards work that way.
No, like the M8X, it has magnetic sensors that sense the position of the key all the way from 0 to full push into aftertouch, and so it could technically determine velocity during the keystroke. If you just very lightly pluck it, or if you press it with equal velocity and push it into the felt, it can see and measure the difference between those two.
That's I want to bring this up because it's actually really interesting. So the one thing I'll say about MIDI 2 is this is probably where we will see the next range of technology development over the next 20 years, and especially in keys, right? Because, as you said, a lot of key velocity is between two switches. You measure the time between the two switches. You get some numeric value. You map that to a MIDI velocity. Now what you're getting is some really, really interesting technology. The Montage M has, especially on the 88 keys, it's got this, as you said, it's got this sort of whole positional velocity, and it's more than aftertouch, right?
Right.
You have a look at some of the stuff that's been demonstrated with a company called we'll do some work with, so but not on this particular part of their products. They've got key positioning technology as well that they've been demonstrating at some of the last couple of shows and NAMM shows and stuff like that. Very similar, where you can actually, again, push it down. But the thing that gets interesting is when you start looking at how many, again, it's almost like an analog kind of thing. And one of the things that's also with that is the ability to then say, well, when I press down the key, the first part's velocity, but the second part might be a per note controller, right? Or on the upstroke, it's going to be like a per note controller that maybe affects the filter or the cutoff or something on just that note, because we can do all of that kind of sensitive work. But it also means that you can have a different mapping based on the kind of product that you've got. So, for example, organs, for example, their velocity they don't really have velocity, but their triggers on a proper organ is right at the top, right? Whereas the piano is quite far down, generally speaking, when you're doing it. So now what happens is when you go to play an organ patch, you might say, well, actually, what I'm going to do is have the velocity right, the trigger for the for this velocity right at the very top of the actual key, on the stroke, so it plays more naturally if you're used to playing a proper organ, versus a piano which might have a very different kind of stroke, which has got both hammer velocity and key velocity, right? You've got this whole kind of new boom of potential technology that can happen. Not let alone things we do talk about, things like some of the new MPE keyboards and stuff like that, where you can sort of wiggle things back and forth and all the rest of it. So I think what we will see is a lot more interesting technology coming out, because they can now use a greater range of information. Yeah.
Now I want a synth key bed with haptic feel, with two-way MIDI response, so I can select whether I want it to feel like a Steinway or a Hammond organ.
Look up a paper by a guy named Brent Gillespie.
All right.
Well, and I mean, this is the whole Melbourne Instruments roto control and the Nina and Delilah synths and stuff like that. That not keyboards, but certainly all of the knobs having haptic control on those knobs. If you haven't played with one, go play with it, because that is fantastic technology to actually go, oh, it feels nice and smooth, and oh no, it's clicky, and oh, it's got limits, and you don't, and oh, it's got the top detent in it. It's so subtle, and that same knob can do so many different things, and that again I think is going to be if someone's writing here, the rotor control is a hard sell for people who don't get to touch it for themselves. And I would absolutely agree. It's something you have to actually go and experience, because you go, oh, what's the big deal? And then when you play with it, you're like, oh, it makes so much sense, because something needs to be a rotary control. It can be a rotary control. Something needs to do that, and that I can say. And it's expensive technology. So it's probably going to be, I can see it in the future being in a lot of higher end, that kind of thing being in higher end equipment. But, that's, well, I guess that's, you pay for it, so you should expect
it's
it.
expensive today until it becomes popular, and then it starts getting mass manufactured. And
exactly.
Yeah.
This guy Gillespie was at Stanford's CCRMA, Karma, and this was probably late 90s, actually. And he had, because this was what was available to him as a grad student as spare parts, hooked up the engines from a few Winchester hard drives, which were early removable platter hard drives. And he hooked them up to a weighted key bed. And so he had created something where you could vary the feel of the key bed, and introduce chunks for being able to feel, for instance, when the hammer flew off, or when you were hitting two registers on a harpsichord. And I continue to think that's a brilliant idea and fantastic. And it's also a way for hardware to distinguish itself, right? I mean, so these guys, the haptic feedback actually can be quite useful, but it's, the dimensions of it are limited. So it's a way that hardware can continue to differentiate itself. I think I wrote about Julian Smith had this idea for using piezo responsive surfaces on touch screens to create little bumps, for instance. I don't know if anyone's ever done that. But he said that in an interview, and I think I published it long ago in Electronic Musician. But it's a neat idea, because we're as humans, we're used to redundant sensory input, and we've become now very accustomed to sensory input, which is only from our eyes or only from our ears, and even having little things like the thing just thumping every once in a while, like it just thumped at me when it tried to wake up. Is that really contributes to our ability to understand and deal with the world. And so anything like you're talking about the roto knob, what is it? Roto control.
Roto control, yeah.
And I actually have not played with the roto control. I played with Melbourne Instruments synth. and appreciated that there as well, right? You have, like, I have this very nice controller from a brand I won't name down here, and it has endless, it has rotary encoders for everything, which is great, and if you flick it one way, you can get to 0, flick it the other way, you can get to 127, but it would be very nice to be able to feel a center detent, to be able to feel an end, to be able to feel, clicks if you're selecting between things.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are great. So yeah, neat stuff.
Especially in live performance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also the beauty about that kind of stuff too is that you can actually see when you're changing patches, for example, you see where the knob's going, right? Like one of my first keyboards was a Nord lead one. Love that thing to death. Which is great. The hardest part was every time I changed a patch and was like, well, how did this patch, which at least I could do that on that particular keyboard, but how does this patch was made? I'd be like literally turning each knob to get to the right position that brought me back to the sound that I was doing, and then I'd go back and do it again over the next one and spend hours doing that. And it was kind of like watching that go, and it's like, oh, we've changed the patch. And then, it's doing and you watch it in morph mode, and all the knobs, you turn one knob, and all these other knobs are moving over to the next thing. And again, this is something that has been in the plugin world for a long time. We don't think about this in terms of, we take it for granted. That's exactly the way a computer should work. We should see it. We don't think about that in terms of hardware, and I think that's where we're going to see huge amounts of progress.
You hit shift and rotate the knob. Like that's pretty much, most of them do that now. If you hit shift and turn the knob, it shows you what the value is without changing it. I know I have quite a few synths that do exactly that.
Yeah.
Henrik, you've been very quiet.
Take it over.
Yeah. I've been enjoying the show. It's great. I don't have to say anything. You just keep talking about something interesting. That's good. So when is it time for MIDI 2.0?
Never. Don't even go there. Look. If let's face it. It took 40 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm going to be there for the next 40 to go to the next one. Look, there's so much future-proofing on it. We had a lot of problems with MIDI 1 running out of address space. It was like things like, we want to do things, and there's no more commands left. We had a lot of that kind of problem. There's so much free space now, and there's so many things that we could do quite easily without actually ever running out of space. I'm waiting for someone to turn around and say that 32 bits is not enough resolution. I think I've already had that comment from somebody once on a NAMM floor where they said, "Oh, you should be looking at 64-bit," and I'm like, I'll wait eagerly for the for a knob that can handle 64 bits of resolution. But I think it's mainly because they were thinking in terms of a lot of plugins do 64-bit, but we're a bit like, well, we're not doing audio, we're doing messaging. There is a difference.
It's control signals.
It's control signals. One of the things we didn't really get a chance to talk about too much yet is things like network MIDI and stuff like that. So, we're network MIDI too. Considering that how old TCP IP is, or IP networks are, I can't. I'm really hoping we don't need to worry about it. I mean, never say never, but I'm also a bit like, I get the feeling MIDI 3 will happen. Maybe in 80 years. Maybe by that stage we won't need MIDI at all. Maybe it'll all be AI. God forbid.
Neural interfaces and telepathy.
Yeah,
Yeah, hopefully there'll be people in 80 years.
Yeah,
that's a bigger problem.
yeah.
Or
Or
energy to
gear,
run
or
computers.
gear. Yeah. Speed. We talked about the baud rate. It's still the same baud rate for most of MIDI, unless you use USB. But Andrew, yeah,
Yeah, MIDI. MIDI 1 was the definition of both the physical hardware and the protocol. That kind of got sort of separated in the mid 90s, especially when USB MIDI 1 came out. USB MIDI 1 will go at USB speeds, which even MIDI USB 1 was like 12 megabits per second. The problem is that a lot of hardware, because their MIDI ports, their DIN MIDI ports, are tied to their USB, sometimes they will keep them at the same speed, right? And so USB should be faster, but oftentimes isn't. Now that's modern. Anything in the last, I'd say 10 years is probably not the case. But so in terms of MIDI 2, it's transport agnostic. We have transports for it. There's a couple of different transports. There's obviously the USB MIDI 2 transport, which is why we're all waiting on the whole Windows stack, and that triggered off a whole them rebuilding their MIDI services because it had sort of languished for so many years. I'm actually running that here on this computer. It's really improved now. There's so much that you can actually do, and they've actually got a lovely visual interface and all the rest of it. So obviously, you're looking at whatever, huge amounts of bandwidth you can throw for the USB. The other big one we were working with that we've just released in the last 12 months is Network MIDI 2, which I actually think long-term Network MIDI 2 will hopefully be more ubiquitous than USB. And the reasons I would like to see that happen is one, we don't have to worry about ground loops. I think someone mentioned that in the chat. Ground loops are a major problem with USB in terms of getting that right. I mean, companies do get it right, but the other thing is distance. So a USB-C cable, you are limited to about 10 to 15 feet, so 3 to 4 meters, 3 to 5 meters at most. Now people are running, studios that go right around their room, or they have lots of cabling, or all those kinds of things. So network kind of presents this kind of opportunity to say, well, actually, I'm going to run it down around the corner because that's where I've got my computer, and that's where I've got my synth, or I run it. Maybe it's a studio where they've got different rooms, and ideally it should be able to be just plugged in and away you go. The other really good thing about Network MIDI 2 is it can be multi-host. And so what I mean by that is that I've got 4 computers in front of me at the moment because I have to work on different things. But I could be in my Mac, and then I can access the MIDI device across the room, and then I can also be in the PC and access the MIDI device across the room. I don't have to replug anything in or out, and so that's a big thing. Now, obviously the other big benefit of MIDI 2 is it's UMP based, so we've got all the high resolution. We run a very, very quick UDP. It's fairly type network. It's fairly robust. We have a thing called forward error correction, which solves any lost packets and so forth. And in a LAN, you should be getting, sub millisecond kind of returns, sub millisecond messaging, which is really good. So super, super quick. And MIDI is such a small protocol, it's not going to suddenly clog up your network. But the other thing, we kind of solved a lot of one of the big things we tried to do, and I see someone's mentioning RTP MIDI here. RTP MIDI is to to actually implement can be actually really complicated. There's lots of
clunky.
little, and there's lots of little, to get it right is really difficult. So we actually really simplified the protocol and really made sure that it stopped a lot of the similar kinds of problems. And so I can see, well, I would like to see it being implemented by more devices. And I know, for example, the Windows MIDI services that are coming out, they're actually, it'll be an add-on, like a downloadable add-on, but they will have network MIDI services built into the Windows stack, right? So you have your literal keyboard, it'll be in your Windows stack, it'll discover it as a MIDI 2 device, you don't have to do anything else, and therefore that's in your applications, MIDI 1 applications and MIDI 2 applications.
Nice.
So you don't have to do anything about it. It's just there. We're hoping that some of the other OS companies will take that on. I know that, for example, in Linux, because Linux has got a really good MIDI 2 stack, the guy who did that, guy called Takashi Iwai from Ulsa and SUSE Linux, he actually has also implemented a MIDI 2 network stack so that it actually ties into the underlying Linux MIDI stack as well. And so again, it all just works under the MIDI 1 programs and MIDI 2 programs. So I can see that being, I would like to see it more as the future connection than USB personally.
I do run RTP here, and it took a lot of work to get it functioning right.
Yep.
Davina said, "Yeah, wireless feature is here." Yeah, and I can do that. I can go upstairs and run Cubase on a laptop and directly control the synths down here. And I don't have audio, obviously, but I do have MIDI, or I could hook it up and Dan could play my wave state remotely if I opened a port on my router.
Yeah.
And it works, but it's a hassle to make it work well and consistently.
Yeah, and there's some people who do some really great stuff with that kind of stuff. We work a lot with a guy called Florian Bomas who does Bonebox, and he does that. But trying to do a whole studio along that lines, adds up.
And by the way, if you notice, all my old classic synths are way back there, where the DIN MIDI goes, and all the new ones, the MIDI ones, are close up. There's a reason for that. Yeah,
because the cables will run that distance. That's right. Yeah. So yeah, that's the other thing too, is that with network, you can run one cable up to the back of the room and then have, a network hub off the back, and then suddenly you've got a whole bunch of things there. So yeah, audio is still an issue in terms of, there are some open source audio standards. It'd be really nice to be able to start implementing them a lot more easily. But in terms of MIDI, we've got that there. The other thing we're working on at the moment, which is in the background. So we did this first one, and it's just literally client to host. I'm a client. I want to talk to you as a host, and you make a connection. We're now looking at remote management with that as well. So you can sit on your phone or sit on your computer or whatever it is and see a topology of all the network and who's connected to what across the network as well, so that you can actually then, I don't want that to connect to that, I want to disconnect that, and I want it to connect over there as well. So again, it's anything that's not been thought about before, but at least it's a standard.
So sorry, go ahead, Henry.
Okay, but it will change the subject a little bit. Talking about connections, I can't even show one, but if you use a small 3.5-inch jacks for MIDI, there are the two standards where the positive and negative is inverted.
Yeah, the 3.5-inch MIDI is literally just DIN MIDI with a different connector on it.
Yeah, I know that, but
yes, there's TRS A and B.
But shouldn't there be a rule for either one standard instead of two, or that all manufacturers have a diode bridge in their input, so everything is rectified?
Okay. I'll answer this, right? Because this is so the MIDI Association itself is not a policing organization,
Ah, damn.
right? No, and for good reason. And I've had this sort of conversation a few times because it's actually we work with members and member companies, and we try and get members to agree on things, and they don't always agree. And I believe, and the TRS standard there was obviously a difference between, I think, Korg had a standard, and then other
Korg.
people had a different standard, and then
Teenage
it went
Engineering and Korg.
yeah, and then and there was A and B standard, right?
Yep.
Which wasn't called A and B at the time. It was just the Korg standard, and I think who was the other ones? Arturia or Novation, or one of them had the other way around. I can't remember, but it was sort of, and so I think so. The Media Association went with the Korg standard, and I believe that the reason for that was just because they were the people that were there at the time. But the Media Association itself doesn't police things. The only thing we police is the use of the new logo. You can't put that on a device because that's actually a registered trademark unless you are a member and it's a MIDI 2 product. That's or so there's a logo licensing agreement that you have to go through. But the reason for that is because we want people to be able to build MIDI products, right? You don't want to have a situation where everyone who's just experimenting or trying something out has to, pay a fee or whatever. Now we have members, and we actively encourage members, and we also have SysXID holders, and watch that space a bit because there's going to be some interesting changes coming up in the next couple of months about that, which I'm not allowed to announce yet. But for people who are developers, it'll be hopefully a big help for developers. But there's a reason why MIDI specs go out for free, right? It's about encouraging and fostering innovation. I mean, we do this whole thing called the MIDI Innovation Awards every year, and some of the people are literally just people sitting in their, I don't want to say basements, but they're sitting at home and they're building these little products, and then they're, going off and coming up with some great ideas. You're not going to get that if we're going to police every single person. And so on one hand, it's terrible because it does mean things like the A and B standard happened, which, by the way, that all happened before the Media Association were involved, right? Those decisions were made, and then the Media Association said, look, this is getting out of hand, more or less. We need to make a decision on that. And that's why then we had the A and B standard. But yeah, we can't really police people,
I'd like to make a request of the MIDI Association, that is that they do not ever consider any kind of DRM bit.
I could not see that happening. I mean, it's not to say that a member couldn't bring that to the association, but it would be contentious, I would say. And I can't speak for every member, because if a bunch of members wanted to do that, but I don't. I think, Dan?
As I can see it being considered more if there is exchange of data that could be proprietary, or if I'm sending a profile and it includes a sample because it's part of then you start getting into that kind of.
In terms, so let me put it this way: any standard, things change. Right, but any standard that's defined in the Media Association is designed so that other people can go use it.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Right. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't then use those standards to have encoded data. So one of the things we talk about property exchange is you can move files back and forth. We don't know what's in the files, so you could have a proprietary bit in that file for a proprietary file that's moved across. We don't have any control over that. But in terms of standards, they're not standard if they're behind a bit. But I can't see us doing something where if someone said, oh, we want this sort of proprietary bit, we'd say, well, you go do a proprietary file, but use the standards to move that file around.
Right. Yeah.
I can't see that.
Yeah.
You know, I could be wrong, but I can't see that happening.
I can't see it being terribly secure either, but
No.
Well, I mean, it's no more secure than a bit on a commercial CD that says, "Hey, you can't make a copy of a copy." But of course, there's lots of software that will.
Well, the other thing too is I think you got to remember that MIDI is really defined for the prosumer, not the consumer, right? I mean, we're talking musicians, and the big thing about MIDI is interoperability, and we want everyone to connect to everybody and use your equipment. If we start DRMing that,
Well,
that kind of
and
goes
the reason I
against
said
the
that
ethos,
is
really.
the reason that came to mind is because there are numerous companies now who view subscription as their way forward, and if they want to remove the access to materials that were granted under a subscription that's no longer valid, then is there a way of doing that?
But you remove the access to the. I mean, it depends on what the thing is, but
Yeah,
generally
it really
you
does.
either remove access to the sender or the receiver, and then you're done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you really wanted to do that kind of stuff, there are ways you could do that.
Right.
I mean, if you want to look at ways that look at custom sysex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
sure.
mean, that stops 90% of people, doing stuff. I mean, it doesn't stop them, but there is plenty of people. There are products out there that have undocumented sysex, which technically they're not supposed to do.
All right, I will tell a story about my.
I would say that there are probably few products out there that have fully documented sysex. That's the better way to say it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a very much more positive way of putting it.
Well, I'll tell you, I had a company where we had a product that I built, and it communicated with a PC, and we were having people pirate our software and use our hardware. And the way we solved that was by encrypting the data between them, and now we could hit them with DMCA because they were decrypting proprietary. It's so, there's ways around things, but
yeah, yeah. And I mean, the network MIDI spec, we purposely at this stage have authentication, but we don't have encryption. Right. And the reason, fair enough. Well, it's a couple of things. One, we specifically say it should be based in a LAN, and so once you're in a LAN, it's open slather anyway. So, what's the point? Again, it added a huge layer of complexity, and we're still dealing with a lot of hardware that have very limited 32-bit controllers in them, or very low-level ARM chips or whatever it is that they have in them. If
you're concerned
if they
about
have
latency.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
well, I was just about to say, what about compression? But for the same argument.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, anything you want to bring up before we end for tonight? Any one of you?
No,
It's pleasant to see Andrew again. I normally only see him in Anaheim, so
rushing around.
yes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I'm going to be there this year, so we'll have to see.
I just wanted to thank you both for coming on and doing this. Like I said, I had only surface level knowledge of this, and this has made me really think and get excited about this. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on. The one thing I will say is, we get this question a lot. It's like, when should I stop buying MIDI 1 devices and buy MIDI 2 devices? And the answer is don't. Just buy, if you like the device, buy it. You don't need to be holding out. It'll just be, you'll suddenly buy a device that'll be MIDI 2 capable and you won't even think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Then I will thank you all for coming, and also the chatters. There was a good discussion.
Yeah, there was
in
really
the chat.
great mentions in there.
Yeah, I didn't bring the chat into the stream because we were onto something all the time, so it would perhaps disturb some things. So I didn't do that to this time. Before I end, I have to say, Andrew, you don't know it, but usually we stay here to after the stream and take a short chat. So please stay. And then thank you to all viewers and chatters. It has been a pleasure to do this show. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. So I also hope to see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.